Greetings, History 141 students. This is our last virtual office hours of the semester for our U.S. Survey to 1865 class. As usual, Founding Fathers with me, Megan Piet behind the camera. By the time you watch this, we already have had our final exam. So I'm hoping maybe some of you might go back and want to watch the final office hours, but really we're doing this office hours for those people who are out there, and I know there are several of you, if not many of you, who have been following along with this series and are not enrolled or registered in the class. But the last lecture, actually, Professor Snyder, my colleague in the class, delivered this lecture, and I'm just going to summarize it. But we focused on what we called Lincoln's Civil War. I think where we left off, the South seceded from the Union. We had this event at Fort Sumter, which then prompted the rest of the South, especially Virginia, to secede from the Union. Robert E. Lee had to make this decision whether to stay with the Union or join the Confederacy, and he becomes the general of the Army of Northern Virginia, which will be the primary army in the Confederacy. But what we really focused on in this lecture is the role of Lincoln in all of this. Abraham Lincoln, a minority president in the sense that he only got 39.8% of the vote in the election of 1860, is going to do everything in his power to try to hold the Union together, or at least bring the Union back together, I should say, after secession. The first major issue he has to deal with are related to the border states. These are the states that have yet to make a decision about seceding from the Union. Places like Maryland or Missouri, Kentucky. Lincoln really needs these places, first of all, because they provide a natural geographical border between the North and South. But he's also hoping that they will stay in the Union because all of these border states are slave states. And if Lincoln can get a slave state to remain in the Union, he'll have a much stronger argument against the southern states in the Confederacy to say, look, here are some states that do allow slavery, but have decided to stay with us. And he could make a good argument that way. So there's this famous line where someone asks Lincoln, "Do you think God is on our side, on the side of the Union, or do you think God is on your side in this war?" And Lincoln says, "I don't know if God is on my side, but I must have Kentucky, on my side." So he needs to bring these border states in. And you may recall the issue with Maryland, where Lincoln's going to violate some civil liberties. He's going to arrest many of the Confederates in that state, and thus it's going to be very successful in getting Maryland to come in. Maryland being very important because if they don't stay in the Union, Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by Confederate states, Virginia and Maryland. So that's Lincoln's first task, and he's fairly successful in getting the border states back in. But after that, things do not go very well. As many of you know who read your textbook or know something about the Civil War, the early battles of the Civil War are a disaster for the North. The South routs them in several battles. This does not bode well for Lincoln, and there's a lot of pressure on him to end this war, especially from his political rivals, the Northern Democrats, also known as the Copperheads or the Peace Democrats, who want Lincoln to say enough of the bloodshed, let's bring an end to this war. He's also being pressured by people in his own party who don't think he's equipped to be the president. He's being pressured by the abolitionist faction who wants to make this war not about restoring the Union, but about ending the institution of slavery. So Lincoln is faced with all of these problems. Then he gets word that the South is actually negotiating with England for support, much in the way, say, that France came to the support of the revolutionaries. So he's very, very concerned about this. He has a general in George McClellan, the general of the Army of the Potomac, the main Union army, who will not fight. At least he will not engage the enemy in the way that Lincoln wants him to engage the enemy. So all of these problems exist. That then leads us, again, we move very quickly through this, but that then leads us to Lincoln's decision in 1862 to pass the Emancipation Proclamation. And if you remember what we argued in class is Lincoln's decision to free the slaves goes hand in hand with his ultimate goal of preserving the Union. Again, Lincoln's decision to free the slaves, or at least the slaves that exist in the Confederacy, because the Emancipation Proclamation does not apply to the slaves in the border states. Free the slaves so that you can achieve your ultimate end of getting the Union back together. And by passing the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln is able to rile up the slaves in the South. If they believe that they're free, they may respond, they may rebel against their plantation owners, and many of them are actually going to join the Northern Army. He also gets England off his back. England, which has already freed slavery, or ended slavery in the 1830s, is not going to side with a slaveholding society against a society that has made the North, in this case, that has made a definitive statement that they are going to end slavery. So he solves that problem. He also solves the problem of the abolitionists pressuring him to make this war about slavery. So on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation goes into practice. It frees all of the slaves, or it's a presidential proclamation that frees all of the slaves in the South that are part of the Confederacy. It doesn't free all the slaves, remember, because there's still slaves in the border states who are part of the Union. Again, this shows that Lincoln has no particular interest either in freeing the slaves or not freeing all of the slaves, as long as he can preserve the Union. So again, the Emancipation Proclamation does not touch slavery. It does not affect slaves in places like Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and so forth. Now, what is actually very important to note is that the Emancipation Proclamation does nothing to legally free slaves. That's going to happen with the 13th Amendment after the war is over. But look at the Emancipation Proclamation as a way for Lincoln to sort of solve all of these problems that he has. And after the Battle of Antietam, in which he issues the Emancipation Proclamation shortly thereafter, things do turn for the Union. And as you can read in your textbook or read in other books on the Civil War, you know that Lincoln indeed, or the North indeed, does win this war. And then go back and think about the seminar from last week, in which we read Lincoln's second inaugural address. Once it looks like the North is going to win, Lincoln now sets out to bring the Union together, to heal the wounds, have malice toward none, charity for all. Let's not judge one another. Let's start afresh. Let's start anew and strengthen this nation that was so broken and divided by the Civil War. So thank you for watching the virtual office hours this semester. Tried a new experiment this semester with bringing it directly to the History 141 class. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to all of you. We're filming this on December, what is it, Megan, the 15th, 16th? Something like that. So we're wrapping things up here for the semester as well at Messiah College. We will be back in the spring. I don't know what we're going to be talking about on the virtual office hours yet, but the virtual office hours will be back. Megan will be back. And we will go from there. And if you have any ideas about what you want to talk about in the spring, by all means email me at my email address jfea@messiah.edu. So again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. It's been a great semester. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it's been informative to you, and we'll see you probably in January.